to welcome you to session 1, season 2 of We Need to Talk. And I'm absolutely excited beyond measure to have you guys in the room. I was hoping to have Claudia and Peter, who were graduates of season 1. I was hoping to have them as well, but things come up, and in Claudia's case, her best friend's father died overnight. And so there's lots going on in her life at the moment. Peter, just something came up at the last minute. And Jamie, I'm not too sure where Jamie is at the moment, but we'll catch him up when we arrive. But I'm really appreciative of the great hearts and minds that are in the room, because I know you all to varying degrees, but I know you all. And so I know we have great hearts and minds in the room. And I'm sure that once you get to know one another a bit, we had Terry and Richard and Paul were part of season 1. So as were Claudia and Peter. So, but let's kick off. I've asked the group a question: what's brought you joy in the last little bit, and how has that added you to magnificence? And I thought I'd kick that off just by saying, and I'm just going to share the screen with you briefly. I want to introduce you to Molly. Molly is our 9-year-old German Shepherd, and she's been very excited in the past week because I've been able to resume walking after a bit of a health setback where I wasn't able to walk for a little bit. And we've resumed our daily walk. Molly's just gone 9 years old, and she's the 5th in a line in our family of German Shepherds. So her joy has brought me joy and brought a little bit of routine back. Which I think is a part of Happy Bee Magnificence. We have routines and rituals in our life that maintain a joy. And the daily walk with Molly and all of our previous dogs has been a part of that journey for since I was 30 years old, I think, when we had our first shepherd. So that's me. Who'd like to be next?
Well, seeing as I'm on my screen, I'm next to you. I'll go next then.
Okay. Well,
small things. Actually, a recognition of small things has been my thing for the last week. I guess, like a lot of us, we're sort of encouraged to aim for big things. And when things are complex and complicated as they are, I mean, I guess all over, we're particularly blessed with complexity in the UK at the moment. And it's the small things that matter. So I've had a couple of weeks now of quite a lot of small things working and joining together. And that's not just been satisfactory, if you like, at a functional or achievement level. It's actually been a source of significant satisfaction.
Wonderful.
So it's just a reminder to me that small things matter.
Wonderful, Richard. Thank you. And we might, and when we get to stories later on, we might hear a little about one of your projects, which is about new artisans, which myself and Dan are involved in, and we're excited about it. Who's next?
And can I pick up the link of Small Things Matter?
Yeah, by all means.
Thank you, Richard. I'm Allan Parker, and Richard, I'm a microbehavioral neuroscientist and a forensic linguist. So for me, wow. I love it. I love it when I hear somebody say small things matter, because I spend my life looking at very small things. But the thing that brought me joy, and it's actually in the last hour, I had a run-in with bowel cancer in 2021 through most of 21. And I'm all clear and have been for my last biopsy was about 6 months ago, and everything's clear. And I was a serious distance runner prior to bowel cancer, and I'm only back running over the last couple of weeks. And I've just come from the gym. I just broke 50 minutes for 10 Ks on a treadmill. So I'm saying I'm back, Richard.
Very good.
Wonderful. And an encouragement as well. And no doubt you'll learn from Allan. Allan and I have been colleagues for over a quarter of a century.
Pretty close, I would think.
Pretty close.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm sure Allan will bring much to the group, and that you will experience great joy as Allan brings his expertise and experience, as you all will over time. Who'd like to be next?
I'll go, Ian, if you like.
Yes, Dan.
So a couple of weekends ago, everyone got a bit excited in this country, and we had all kinds of celebrations. And as a village here, we're about, what are we, about 80 houses spread over 4 or 5 square miles. So it's quite a spread out little sort of parish. And we congregate occasionally down in the paddock below the church. And the local shepherd gets very excited, puts some bales of straw out, the pole over the river, and dams it up. And I just love sitting back on days like that and noticing a pole, a pillow, and a puddle seems to be some form of social alchemy, where the whole place has all this fun and comes together, particularly after the pandemic, where we've had relationships at an unfamiliar distance for quite a time. And it was just wonderful, the simplicity of the day, and just everyone of all ages just really enjoying being together, doing the most silliest, simplest of things. And it's a wonderful source of happiness for lots of people.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Who's next?
I'll go next. And carrying on from the theme, I think, but I like to live by the mantra of do something every day that brings you joy. And for me, that could be going for a bike ride or a swim, or my moment of absolute unbridled joy a couple of weeks ago was watching Top Gun. Because it made me feel like I was 15 again.
Great. There's been a lot of talk about the movie. I haven't seen it as yet myself, but I think my own experience is, if we stay young at heart, we live a good life.
Yep.
I think he was brilliant to hold that movie back until he could get full theatres and the whole experience. He can make a lot of money out of that.
Yeah, indeed. Whether you're a Tom Cruise fan or not, he tends to have good timing with these things.
Yeah.
All right, who's next?
Well, I can go next.
Go, Lindsay.
So, well, on the superficial level, unbridled joy this morning when I woke up to find the Socceroos have qualified for the World Cup. Now, I'm a New Zealander, but I've been in Australia for 40 years, so I do identify with the Australian team when they're the only ones left in there. So that was great. And on another level, I put out a newsletter to my subscribers, and the last one I put out brought me a lot of joy. It focused on one statement that I heard from Eckhart Tolle, which was, and I told my subscribers to substitute the words that worked for them, but I just quoted Eckhart directly, which was, spiritual awakening is not an achievement, it's a realization. And for me, it was nice to, in the terms of magnificence, to be reminded that I'm a human being and not a human doing.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Which leaves your good self, Donovan.
I think Terry's haven't go yet, but yeah, I'm happy to go next. So
Terry, sorry, Terry, I was ahead of myself.
No, I'll jump in behind Donovan. Go ahead.
Okay, Donovan.
I normally work in Sydney, but I've been in Canberra for the last 3 weeks. I think what's brought me a lot of joy is actually meeting people that I've only seen online, actually meeting them in person. And one of the colleagues in Canberra, I was working from home for one day. The next day when I went into the office, she said, Donovan, it was boring yesterday when you weren't in the office. So I guess not only was it bringing me joy, but also the people around me, I think, also enjoyed having me there, which was, I guess, nice to hear. But I think when I thought about it a bit deeper, I thought maybe that's only happening because of all these other things, like having a good night's sleep, like this idea of these micro actions, having a good sleep, going to the gym, having a good breakfast, a coffee, all these things maybe together just add to that feeling that can then bring itself into other parts of your life.
Wonderful. Okay, Terry, my apologies for excluding you previously, but lucky last.
Yeah, no problem at all. What probably brought me quite unexpected joy over the last few weeks has been Peter Milligan, who's not here today, but Peter shared his 60 life-changing moments or experiences, and I just signed up to it 3 weeks ago, and just getting that email each Friday where you don't necessarily get the time, but sometime over the weekend you tune in to his take on life and his advice in a 5-10 minute slot. I think it's been really excellent, and just giving a shout out to Peter. I know he's not here, but to share that sort of content with people, I think it's wonderful by him. So anybody who's not signed up to it, I would recommend it. And the unexpected side benefit of it is I've usually been playing it when I'm at home after traveling during the week, and now my wife is actually listening to it more than I am. So she's like, "Oh, this is fantastic to tune into 5 minutes of help advice of how just to get through life," So it's been an unexpected little piece of joy.
Yeah, Peter's done well, as Richard and Peter know, and maybe Paul knows as well. Peter and I worked together 30 plus years ago, and I think he's one of the psychologists I know who's maintained a sense of reality. So I've watched all 60 lessons, Terry. So he's done a great job with that. So Peter, when you watch this, feel the appreciation and the love, and we'll hopefully see you next time. All right, so I'm just going to just share the screen with you again, just briefly. I thought that this season, I just wanted to formalize the process anymore. We'll just tell Molly to go to bed in a nice way shortly. But I just wanted to remind you of the process that we'll go through today, this evening, and also as we go. Shortly, I'll tell a story, and then we'll have a conversation about what you hear yourself say to yourself during that story. We'll then hear your stories. We'll have more conversations, and towards the end, we'll look at some action decisions that you might make. And new this time is you can contact me anytime for a short phone call or as a short Zoom call if you need some help implementing and integrating your decisions. That's part of the deal. So I just wanted to kind of just remind you at the start. I hope you've all had a chance to look at the Happy Being Magnificent Story 1, where I basically put across a belief that I have that we're all born magnificent, and something happens to us, or we allow something to happen to us that changes that. And for a lot of people, they go from feeling magnificent to either miserable or mediocre, and they stay there the rest of their lives. In my case, I think the first misstep, I felt magnificent up until about age 13 or so. Life was pretty good, I think, up until that moment. And there were really three things that were going on, and one thing kind of tipped me over the edge, and I wanted to share those with you briefly in what I'm calling story 2 of the Happy Being Magnificent journey. So I was raised in the Christian tradition, and so and I was my family were part of the Church of Christ movement, and they were zealots, to say the least. And so I had this concept that I was a sinner from very on early in my life. And then I heard another message when I started going to school, particularly high school. I heard another message, and that was, "You're stupid." And it really wasn't that I was stupid, I was just bored. But most teachers, in fact, all of my early teachers up until about the age of 15 or 16, saw me as being stupid. And so I had these concepts in my mind that I'm a sinner and I'm stupid, but I still had this sense that I was a one-of-a-kind human being. I think a lot of that came from my grandparents on my mother's side in particular. And my grandma in particular, we knew her as, we called her Nana. And we used to go to Nana's place. They lived about a mile from where we lived when I was a child. And I used to go there often after school, but particularly on Saturdays, often the grandchildren would gather, and often Nana would look over the table and she'd point at one of us. And I remember the day she pointed at me and she said, "You're special." So I had this confusion in my mind. Am I special? Am I stupid? Or am I a sinner? And then there was this event. And I think I decided then that I was stupid, and I carried that forward. So I slipped from magnificence probably to miserable for a little bit, but I settled on mediocrity. And that event was, I was a good cricketer in those early teen years, and I got chosen to play in a carnival that took me out of my local town. But my father wouldn't let me play because some of the games were on Sundays. And so I wasn't allowed to play. I think it's fair to say that I resented my father for the next 30 years. Because what happened was that I was the first to practice, the last to leave. I practiced at home. I did all sorts of things. I was incredibly diligent and I was very good at the game. And the reward was to get chosen in this special competition, and then I wasn't allowed to play. And I think I made a decision in my mind then to be mediocre. And I didn't really get reawakened for probably 4 or 5 years after that, when I had the one and only teacher in my entire career who actually saw me as a one-of-a-kind human being, and who helped me to get a handle on things and sort of set me on a path. When I left school, this particular teacher, the report that he wrote, it said Ian has a sense of humour. Unfortunately, there wasn't much else, but it was he who rekindled my sense of humour and started to get me on this path, I think, back towards magnificence. But when I left school, I didn't have that, and the only reason I got a job was because my grandfather had worked for a well-known building company, and my father put pressure on them and they gave me a job, and I began my working life as a brickies labourer. And so my job was to throw bricks to the bricklayers and wheel the cement and wheel the concrete. Sometimes Ballarat is my hometown. There's one of the university campuses there. It's a 4-story building. Well, I threw a lot of the bricks that are in that building and wheeled a lot of the concrete. But my mind was dying. No disrespects to bricklayers and brickies labourers. And one day, and you need a little bit of imagination here, gentlemen, because I graduated, I guess, from a brickies labourer to a painter, and I did a bit of an apprenticeship as a painter. And one day I'm painting that church where I heard over and over, "You're a sinner." I must admit that a lot of graffiti went through my mind, but I did the proper job on the church. And then there was a call from Mrs. Murray, who was a friend of my mother's, and she lived over the road. There were no mobile phones in those days. And she came across to say, I had a call from Noel, who worked for the Commonwealth Employment Service. They were the only recruitment agency in Australia in the late 60s. And Noel says to me, and this is where you need your imagination, you need to go and have a shave and a haircut. I had a beard but it was down around here, and I had hair halfway down my back, and I didn't really look like a financial services person, which was the interview that Noel had for me. I didn't own a suit. In fact, I don't believe at that time that I owned a shirt with a collar. And Noel says, you need to go to the barber, you need to get your mum, you need to get down to the shop, you need to buy a suit, and you need to get to this interview this afternoon. And so we went to my mother and I. When I got home, actually, my mother didn't recognize me momentarily. But we go to a place called Messer and Opie's that's still there, actually, in the main street of Ballarat. And we bought my first suit and my first shirt with a collar, and I think it was my first tie as well. And when I looked in the mirror, just for a moment, I put aside being a sinner and being stupid and thought I might be special just for a moment. And I go to the interview. It's the first real job interview that I've had. And the guy says to me after 3 or 4 minutes, "There's no way on God's earth I could give you a job, son." And I thought, well, bugger that. I'm not going to go down wondering. And so I said to him, I looked him straight in the eye and I said to him, "If you give me an opportunity, I promise you that I won't let you down." And he put his hand across the desk and we shook hands and he said, "You're hired. I'll see you on Monday at 9 o'clock. Wear what you've got on." Words to that effect. And so I turn up on Monday and he says to me, "I really don't know why I hired you, mate, but I just felt in my heart that you might be special." So my grandmother was right, eh? And I think in that moment, I returned to being happy, being magnificent. And that guy became my first mentor and he taught me everything that he knew. So much so that 4 years later, I became his boss. But he set me on this path. I've had setbacks, lots of them since then, but I think overall I've made this sense that I am just like you, a special one of a kind human being, and that when I bring my best to the world really appreciates and values my best. So I wonder, guys, what do you hear yourself saying to yourself in this story?
I think for me as a fellow boomer, all right, there's a boomer thing here, because I think a lot of us of that sort of time were brought up as a sort of vicarious substitute for the lives that our parents had interrupted by the Second World War. And so I think there was a lot of stuff in there about being, about expectations placed on us, not necessarily deliberately, but it was they'd been through all this rubbish, and therefore there was an there was an attitude of expectation, and I could hear that in what you were saying, and again I could see it in mine, because I think very, very similar there. And there's part of me that says as well, one of the things that interests me at the moment is the downside of goal setting, because there's quite a lot of theory, quite a lot of it backed by science. The goals are great for short terms, but actually they're rubbish for long term, because they close down possibility. And I think when you talk about things like magnificence, and if we are heavily goal driven, we've now got tunnel vision towards the goal of one form or another. And the little opportunities that appear in our peripheral vision don't get taken seriously. And if I look at people that I work with, people that I know, I can see that in spades. There is lots of it about. And as you know, Ian and Dan, we've been playing around now for over 2 years with conversations that have absolutely no agenda and absolutely no goal. Regular conversations, just to see what emerges. And if we go back to sources of joy, that's been one, because I think everybody who's been involved in it has found something that maybe they otherwise wouldn't have found. Yes. That maybe just touches on whether we want to call it genius or magnificence or purpose. And we can have lots of words. And with a micro linguist on the screen, I'm going to be sort of very careful there, because words are loaded things. So that's what was going through my mind as you spoke. Those two things. One is that it's really easy to be put upon to assume a responsibility that perhaps nobody is giving us. And And the second thing is to look sideways.
Ian, if I just jump in here, I
Yes.
just Richard, that's wonderful piece of advice in terms of the counterintuitive aspect of goal setting. You know, I think it's entirely logical once you've outlined it, but it's not what people would automatically think of goal setting. But it is. I can see it happening all the time. So that's a great share. And Ian, in terms of what came into my head while you were talking, many different things, some parallel stories in my own life, but the thought I was finishing with was the importance of the people you interact with, the people you surround yourself in life, because that's your choice. And if you choose to allow yourself to be surrounded by people who are negative or who put you down or who don't bring anything additionally positive or open up opportunities for you, that's where you're self-limiting yourself, or we are doing that as individuals. But the benefit of putting yourself out there and meeting new people and investing the time in positive relationships is hugely significant for the development of one's life.
Yes, I think that also helps when we have a disruption that we take badly and we slip out of magnificence and into mediocrity or misery, that those around us, if we have chosen good people, they can quickly lift us out of. And so it turns out to be a temporary lapse, you know. And I think we all have this. If you talk to my wife, I'll tell you for certain I'm not perfect, and I don't think that's the quest. And I think one of the challenges of goal setting, Richard, is, you know, we want to be perfect instead of being open to infinite possibility. Anyhow, who's next?
Just to follow on there, and I'm at risk of getting a bit deep and heavy, so you'll have to close me down. It took me back to my childhood, actually. We're born magnificent, and people convince us otherwise. When I was 7, and I'm the eldest, my parents parted company, and my mum became an alcoholic. So childhood was pretty tough. I'm just picking up on choosing who you surround yourself with. And of course, when you're small, that is not within your gift.
No.
And actually the people around you are forced upon you. You can't actually choose your family. So there was lots of trials and tribulations over the years until I left home at about 15. So it's taken me back there for some reason. So I'm going to need to think about that. And yeah, the people you surround yourself with, but what you can be taught and absorb at that early age, because I find I'm very fortunate and I have found wonderful people to talk to and associate myself with, and I've buried myself in education, and I have a lot to thank from the wonderful teachers that appeared in my life. And then I look at my siblings, and it would appear very clearly that they haven't been as fortunate to bump into someone to help them escape and broaden their minds, and they're now stuck repeating a pattern that they were taught when they were little. So yeah, we're all born magnificent, but we can be dragged off of that path, you know,
Yes.
whether we want to or not. It's quite a formative point of our life. So I'm gonna call time there, but it has stirred something quite deep, Ian. Actually, I'm surprised.
Well, we hope that leads to something positive.
No, I'm sure it will do. So what I'll add then is and this is what I think I've been piecing together over the last couple of years, having had an opportunity for lots of deep discussion. I have probably gone back through and picked out those people that helped me find who I was and allowed me to express my sort of curious self. And that's probably why now a lot of who I am and what I'm about is engaging with other people to help them explore who they are and express themselves. And nothing seems to give me more pleasure than. So I have an accountancy practice. We've got 23 in the team, and the one thing that drives me to go in and, you know, push on every day is helping everyone find the thing they're good at. So
Yes.
I think the positive part of my experiences from years ago is if you can help someone find what naturally excites them, that brings a lot of joy to their life.
Yes.
And helps them be at their best.
I've had a similar path because I had such great mentors. It helped me when I decided to leave the corporate world in my early 30s to become a mentor. And that was part of the driving force, Dan, that because I'd had so many great ones myself, I felt obligated to be one.
Yeah.
I remember that first teacher I told you about, who I think he was the first teacher that I experienced who treated me as a human being. I had the good fortune to have a telephone call with him 40 years on. And it was one of those happenstance things again. I was giving a talk and I was sitting next to the president of the organization who I was giving the talk for. And we were just talking about things in general. And he mentioned the name Jeff Herkus. And I said, I know that guy. He taught me in high school. And I told the brief story of what I just shared with you guys. And it turns out that the guy I was sitting with, he and Jeff had been best friends for 50 years.
Wow.
And so he gave me his phone number, and we were able to have a conversation, and I was able to thank him for being a mentor and being kind to me. And as it turned out, he died not long afterwards. So I had that great opportunity through happenstance to thank the guy for being who he was at the time. All right, Allan, Donovan, Lindsay, Paul, what did you hear yourself say to yourself during the story?
I think, Ian, you'll know this. I've trained myself not to have conversations with myself when I'm listening. You'll probably noticed I copiously take notes all the time. And it has a history in the fact that I had an eye condition at birth and didn't read until I was 30. So I'm a I have thousands and thousands of spiral books with notes. So I didn't have any conversation or any reflection of my own. But the thing that was most prevalent for me while I was writing and listening carefully to you was how extraordinary that I know you for such a long time. And I had never heard that perspective, that story, but I hadn't heard that perspective before. And it was reassuring and comforting for me, I think, is how I describe it out of my listening state. Yeah, and gives me a deeper sense of understanding of you, I think.
Well, that's a nice thing after so long.
Yeah, it's like I've just learned a new aspect of you. Yeah.
All right, I appreciate that, Allan.
Yeah.
As you may know, Allan and I have just recorded our second. We're having conversations about conversations, and we've just begun what will turn out to be some sort of a series. That the recordings are out there. I will make a note to send them to you all so that you can hear what we've been talking about. But thank you, Allan.
Pleasure. Thank you. And may I say thank you, Dan, for your disclosure as well.
So I was reflecting while you were talking about my current situation. I'm in between roles at the moment. Ian knows as well, and I've been going through the process with a number of prospective employers, and I'm starting to find the process a bit grueling, to be honest. It's been going for a couple of months, and I've had a bit of a run of going through the entire process of 2, 3 or more rounds, and getting to the final round where it's maybe 1 of 2 or 1 of 3, and they pick the other person. And having 2 different perspectives on that, I mean, it's always disappointing. But then realizing that to get to that stage in an interview out of potentially 150 people, where it gets whittled down to 2 or 3, and to be one of those 2 or 3, I just need to get to a stage where I'm someone's first choice, not their second. And, because second doesn't pay the bills. But hearing Ian, your story of the very start of your career, and somebody, you putting your best foot forward, and somebody putting their hand out and taking a chance on you, was inspiring, and that's what I need somebody to do with me right now, is to take a chance on me. So it was reassuring, but also in reflecting on that, realizing that through the experience of the past couple of months, I'm getting better each time at defining my values and at articulating what my attributes are that I would bring to a role. And I felt in the last round that I went through last week, I did that very well.
Yeah, which possibly is what you needed to have in order to get the right role for you at the moment. I mean, that's a sort of a throwaway line sometimes. I know myself, when I went for that interview that day, I wasn't in a real good frame of mind. I was a very frustrated person. And that's probably why I kind of questioned the guy in the moment, not really knowing where that came from. But as it turned out, he did take a chance on me, and I'm forever grateful. And I'm sure that person out, and I think that's what, when we have a rough time, like in your case, Dan, and I do appreciate your disclosure, but people took a chance on you, and now you're taking a chance on others. And we probably all got, something similar to say. I know Terry's just got a promotion recently, and Terry, I'm sure, without putting words in your mouth, that although you've had a great career, that a lot of the reasons why you've had such a career is that you've had great mentors, but you've also been one yourself.
Yeah, it's but also a few words there for Paul. I think it is very much, it sounds trite, but it is very much a journey. Sometimes you've got to go through the difficult bits to actually see the clarity and get the clarity of what you are and who you are. And so what you're saying there, Paul, there's a couple of ideas jump to mind. So maybe if you just email me afterwards, I can drop you a couple of things that have just come to mind that might be of help as well over the coming week.
I appreciate your comments there, Terry.
Okay, Donovan, Lindsay, what did you hear yourself say to yourself?
I can go, Lindsay. Yeah, I think Richard touched on it, the power of words. One of my friends, he said that his stepdaughter went to school, and one of the teachers at school told her that she'd never amount to anything. I think it's interesting that these throwaway these throwaway lines to kids have such a huge impact on, I guess, their development and how they feel about themselves. And even when I reflect on, I guess, my growing up, I went to school in the 80s and early 90s. I don't think any of the teachers there really wanted to be teachers, but it must have just paid the bills. And so there wasn't really, I mean, your experiences that you talked about, I never had any teachers that I could really point at and say that person had an impact on my life. But yeah, so anyway, I don't think it was just a reflection I had was on my experience growing up with teachers and adults. And yeah, some of the stories I've heard from some of my friends.
Fascinating how life arrives. One of my teachers, I think I was around 15, he said to me, "You're so stupid, you won't survive your teens." And I remember 35 years later, he was in an audience where I was the keynote speaker. And I happened to just bump into him during the tea break before I gave my speech. And I said to him, I must admit, probably not in the kindest way I could have said it, but remember me. And he didn't. And I said to him, well, you might remember me after my speech and be good to have a cup of coffee with you afterwards. And so during the speech, I told a story without mentioning him about how the majority of my teachers didn't see me as a one-of-a-kind human being, and how eventually that spurred me on to become a one-of-a-kind human being. So I wasn't unkind to him, but we had an interesting chat afterwards where he apologized for his behavior all those years before, and how that he'd had his own awakening and changed his style, and we ended up having quite a good conversation. And I came away from that conversation thinking, well, you never know, do you?
What I think is really interesting as well is words can be powerful, but the response it evokes in the individual, because the same words can have a fundamentally different impact said in the same way, in the same context, maybe even at the same time, to say two individuals in the room. And one might be determined to go and do something because they're not going to be like that. And one might be convinced that's what they are. And I find that really interesting, and
yes,
why that might be the case. The response to words is wildly different between all of us. We're all individuals, aren't we?
I think there's a thing there as well. Just I was thinking about what Paul was saying, and at the start, my journey went the other way around. Okay, because partly because of the environment I was brought in, I could jump through damn nearly any hoop that was put in front of me. I was a conditioned hoop jumper, and one of the things that the hoop jumping took me into, I actually won a scholarship and an RAF scholarship to university, and I'd been offered an RAF one and a Navy one and an Army one. So as far as my parents were concerned, this ticked all the boxes, and twice on Fridays. I mean, this was just, as far as they were concerned, this was it. So I went and did the thing, and I went to university, and I went to Cranwell. And actually, I look back on it now, and that was that there is a real danger, I think. I don't regret any of it, except that the Air Force is not what I was meant for. And the only way I could find out that it's not what I was meant for by going and going through it. And so there is something here, I think, that I found, I mean, at the point at which I was going through this, the organization, we all assumed that the organization had the power. And what we had to do was get ourselves chosen. And I think it takes well, for me, I don't know about everybody else, for me, it took a long time to realize that I could choose. I didn't have to be chosen. And validation came through the choices I made, not through the choices that other people made about me.
Yeah, that's a great.
And I mean, that took a long time. And
I think it's part of the reason why, when I look back at my time as a brickies labourer and as a years as a painter, I wasn't meant to be any of those things.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, I learned a lesson about hard work that has stood me in good stead.
Yeah.
I learned a lesson that you never forget where you come from.
Yeah.
That has also, stood me in good stead. And I met some people in those years who did care, for me and had my back, as it were, and who were early teachers. And so even if we have a rocky start or it takes us ages to work it out, we kind of end up in this place where we're meant to be, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, who would have thought Dan, that, you know, with the rough ride you had as a small child, who would have thought you'd end up as an accountant with a successful business, mentoring other
It
people?
certainly wasn't me.
Who would have thought?
That was not in the game plan when I was 10, I can assure you.
No.
It's funny where life takes you, isn't it?
But I know, you know, I mean, Donovan's probably the youngest here. We'll stab at that, Donovan. But Donovan's been my client for a long time, and one of the things and Donovan's just got a new role. He's now the Chief Information Officer for the leading disability organisation in Australia, and it's been a bit of a journey. But Donovan, you're thriving in the role, I think, in part because you've always had this happy disposition. And interesting thing that I did a speech for the organisation that Donovan was working for previously, and I did some work with some of the executives in that organisation, but we got to a point where further work wasn't going to be possible, but Donovan decided he'd like to work with me privately. And for a while, the organisation paid for that, but then Donovan still pays his own way, now pays his own way, as does Paul. So I think it's an interesting, we've all had different journeys, but we've arrived at this place where we are now. And I sense, although we might have challenges, like in your case, Paul, you've got some anxiety and some natural fears about the future, but I think we're all where we're meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
And being here in this room together gives us an opportunity to further put down roots that will help us to embrace possibility in the future.
Yeah, I'm actually quietly optimistic.
Yeah, which is great. I think you've got a happy disposition as well.
Ian, may I just share a quick story with the group and with Paul particularly?
Yeah,
if I may. Paul, I'm pretty much a one-man band with an executive assistant and a bookkeeper and a couple of IT contractors who support me. And I had the most wonderful executive assistant, and for about 6 or 7 years, she had 2 children during the time with me, not with me, but she did it during the time. And she was remarkable, and I truly thought when she left, I'd have to retire. And she insisted that when she was leaving, she was having the 3rd child, and she said, I can't expect you to do 3 children. And so she talked me into getting somebody. And I flew to, we both looked, we went through all the applicants, and we both chose Jen as the applicant. And I was hesitant because she lived in Darwin and I lived in Tweed Heads. And Joanna said to me, look, it doesn't matter. You know, you and I haven't seen each other through COVID for 2 years. Anyway, I flew to Darwin to meet Jen. And when I met her, I said, look, I'd like to do things differently. Would you mind if I didn't interview you, but you interview me? And she said, oh, that would be wonderful. She said, I've got all the questions prepared. And she opened her book up and she had 26 questions.
Wonderful.
And Paul, they shook my brain to pieces. And I went, there's no way I can not employ you. Her questions left me feeling deeply inadequate and unthought through. So if I may just share that as a potential different angle.
I think what that brings up for me is, in conversations with Richard and others for 2 years, there is a theme actually or a strand that goes through that often when you tip things completely on their head, something wonderful happens.
Yeah.
That just sounds like another example of that.
Yeah.
thing that sort of funny enough, I was reading it this morning, and sometimes these things just seem a bit strange. But I was reading about affordances, which is an architectural term for when a building is designed, what particular parts of the building, its affordance is what it causes you to see.
Mm.
So it conditions the environment that you're in. And I just think when we're saying about who we surround ourselves with, whether we can choose or whether we can't, all of these things are affordances.
Mm.
And you sort of get into noticing what the affordance is. Because it's really weird. If I sort of go back and I look at how I got to now, where I am now is not at all, certainly, I didn't expect to be, and my parents sure as hell didn't expect me to be. But all the way along the way, there are points at which you actually stop for a moment and see things. And I think I think of them, that's why I was looking at affordances for something else I'm trying to get my head around at the moment. But I think as we go down, all of these things are affordances. I mean, I would guess we've all been where Paul is at the moment. And we actually come out, when we end up the other side of it, you end up saying, well, what the hell was I worried about? But these are all affordances. And I think the real benefit of it is just to take that moment. And I can look back at it now and I can see where the affordances were.
That's what I'm thinking about, Richard. It's very difficult in the moment to see it.
Yeah.
But looking back at it as an observer, you can make sense of everything. Take the good out of and the learnings of all the opportunities that have come along. And I wouldn't regret any aspect of my life. I've learned a huge amount. And everything I've experienced so far has helped me work out who I am. And I wouldn't change a minute of it. But it's a lot easier to say that now looking back than it felt at times going through. Do you know, I think that perspective is important.
Yeah.
And sometimes the messages come on the end of pointy sticks, don't they? They don't come nicely gift wrapped, and here you are, and it's nice and gentle.
It's a fact, and I tell this to a lot of young people that I speak to, that if I look back on my career, the very best things that have happened to me have happened out of things that I missed out on.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
There was an American who I worked with, 40 years ago now, who pinned me against a wall at one point and said, if you want to soar like an eagle, don't surround yourself with turkeys. He said it in a rather more direct fashion than that, but that was the essence of his message. I always remember that.
Another thing that, Paul, just come to mind is one of the things I was taught. I used to play a lot of sport, and you used to get so focused on the winning. And I remember an old coach sort of taking our group aside and said, guys, whenever you win, you're not as good as they tell you are, be it the papers or whatever. And whenever you lose, you're not as bad as they're telling you are. So you have to sort of hit this even keel in your own mind that you don't drink the Kool-Aid and you don't believe all the hype when things are going well for you, but you don't beat yourself up whenever you're on a bad run and you're not getting the results, because you're the same person and you'll come through that cycle.
Yes, wonderful. I think perspective. Go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to follow Terry there, because we had Williams' end of season football tournament on Sunday morning. 16 teams, under 10s, and it was absolutely fascinating to just observe the coaches and the behavior of the teams. And it's really, really interesting. Like, some of the parents in our team get a little bit frustrated with our coach because he's so laid back, he's asleep. Okay, and they would like to see a little bit more of a competitive edge, and it's just not how he's wired. He's all about turning up and working out what position you naturally fit in, and having some fun as a group of guys and girls. And I was just watching as we went through the different rounds. What were the coaches doing and how were the players behaving? And the teams doing the best, no, that's the wrong word. The teams that were scoring the points and winning the games were often agitated, frustrated and crying in between games because they didn't score another goal or they happened to lose that one, even though they're at the top of the table. And our lads were playing swing ball because we took one with us and stuck it in the ground, and it was unbelievably different. You know, we ended up coming 5th out of 16, which is quite respectable. And they had a load of fun, and they were like playing swing ball and chilled out in between games. And some of the others were getting really uptight about not being at the very top of the table. You know, second wasn't good enough. And I think the issue with winning is you have to keep winning. Otherwise it feels dreadfully uncomfortable, doesn't it?
Yeah. I think Richard wrote an article recently where, Richard, you questioned the value of performance, and that maybe we should change our perspective around performance.
I did, for the same reason, really, as goals. And it's not, you know, it's not a truth. It's a perspective. But what do we mean by performance? You know, when we look at performance, it's different in a sport to in life. You know, it's the difference between, for those of you familiar with the work, the idea of sort of finite and infinite games. You know, finite games are nice. They have rules and uniforms and time periods and a score, but they're finite. The infinite game is the game of games. It's everything that goes on. And the idea of performance in life is that, I think it goes back to what Dan was saying, which is if people treat life as a performance, they're gonna live very miserable lives, because there's always going to be areas where we could perform better. And so I think, like goals, performance is a really useful concept as long as it's kept in a cage, as long as you don't let it get ideas above its station. And of course, the way that we're brought up, and my wife's an early years educator, a very strange early years educator, has a doctorate in childhood inquiry, but very deeply into what we do with children at a young age. That I forget, you know, we de-genius children. You know, we have a system that is based around performance and regular assessment, which again can have its place, but not if that's how we define ourselves. And I think we take that, we sort of take that up through. So I think, you know, the point that Dan was making, which is, yeah, play, you know, if it's your life, play swing ball in between the gigs. You know, and there's all sorts of stuff in there that I think what we need, it's the people we're surrounded by. I think the thing that I have learned, particularly through this strange period of the pandemic, when I look at people, it's community matters. And it's secondary whether that community is physical or digital. And the idea of sort of, there's a rhythm, ceremony, there's all sorts of stuff that we could end up, or that fascinates me with it, as to how you do it. But the fact that there is always somebody there, and you're not going to talk about performance or the car you've got, or, you know, da-di-da-di-da-di-da-di-da. It's actually about turning up as a human being. Yeah. And just the joy of it, you know. And I'm beginning to preach, so I'll stop. But I think that's where the thing on performance came. We give performance far too much weight, in my view.
A couple of days ago, I finished reading a book that you recommended, Richard, and my wife Carol is currently reading it as we speak. But the book's called The Club at the Other End of Town.
Ah, brilliant.
And I think it's just a wonderful insight into what you're talking about, that when we turn up as human beings,
yeah,
everything flows from there. You know, I began talking about human being centered conversations a while back, because I got tired of conversations that weren't.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking about everything else, and it was almost as if we were ignoring the human beings in the room.
Yeah.
You know, at one time, part of my role was to I'd get called in and to go and give feedback on meetings. And I don't know how many times in several assignments I found myself in the first 5 minutes putting my hand up. I often didn't sit around the table with the executives, whatever. I sat as an observer on the side, but I'd often put my hand up and get the chairman's attention. And my question was, and it was usually, gentlemen, but what is the purpose of this meeting? I'm unclear.
Yeah.
And pretty much no one in the room could answer the question. And then you go to another typical thing was you go through all these endless slides with statistics, and there was nothing about humans. Yeah. I once read a pre-meeting document. It was 176 pages, and the word people or person wasn't mentioned once. I actually gave it to Carol. I said, I know this is going to be boring, but can you read this and make sure that I'm right, that the word people or person is not mentioned in this document? And she confirmed my worst suspicions. And when I raised that with the group, I said, I've read this document, all 176 pages, and not on one page do I see the word people or person mentioned. So with all due respects, I want to suggest to you guys that you've lost the plot. And
someone like me, Ian, questioning what the communication strategy was for the new values that appeared on the website.
Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff, isn't there? But I think when we center the conversation, which of course these conversations we're having here, when they're human beings centered, we get a flow on that leads us to possibility. Now, Lindsay, I don't want to leave you out, but we're a ways away from that story. But I wonder if you've got anything to share around what you heard yourself say to yourself during the story.
Well, yeah, I feel I was born magnificent and lost the plot along the way. I could identify with that. And what struck me was the church had a very strong influence in my life, and I found it, looking back, to be abusive. And I found that I've had to undo a lot. It's quite a potent mix when you throw God and authority into the mix when you're a child.
Took me 30 years to get over that one, Lindsay.
Oh, I tell you. So that resonated with me, and so yeah, to me it's the great undoing of what was done to me. Yeah, just undoing a lot of that.
Just so that we're not disrespectful to anyone who might watch this, but what I learned, Lindsay, was that there is a chasm of a difference between faith and religion. And when I worked that out, I was able to free myself from religion and the associated rules.
Yeah.
And then of course you look at, when I looked at the corporate world, I found it was the same abusive problem there. There was a whole lot of rules.
Right.
And I think that's one of the challenges with performance, Richard, and all these other things that we've got out there in the business world, is they become rules and nobody really understands what the rules are about or what they're for.
I think there's an interesting part in that, just something to mention as you go through. I'm reading a book at the moment by Robin Dunbar, he of the Dunbar Number.
Yeah.
Right? And the book is on religions, how they evolved and why they endure. And he makes a really sort of interesting point, though. If you go back before we'd invented civilizations, all of the faith systems, all the religions, if you like, were animist. So it regarded everything as having a spirit, the trees, the water.
Yeah.
Everything was animist. And as we got together in larger and larger groups, that didn't work very well because there were so many varieties of it. There was no coherence through that you could use to organize larger society, which is where we got doctrinal religions, whether it's Christianity or Buddhism or whatever. And and the fact that the doctrinal religions for individuals, lose a lot of their vibrancy, and so they become about being judged and being assessed, and as against a relationship with what's around us for what it is, as against the way that we are told to value it. And so I think if I take that into the corporate world, I think that's really easy to fall into. I mean, I've been on both sides of that. You know, I was a head priest, for God's sake. So there's and I think it is, we're back to these sort of conversations, which is, it's not about it being right or wrong. It is just about, who was saying about somebody was saying even keel decision making. I like that. So I wrote it down. There is something here of, on the one hand and on the other hand, and where am I?
Yes. Yeah. And one of the, and we'll come back to you, Lindsay, but one of the things that I explore lots with people and how I would put this, and I'm not standing up in my usual spot, but I just want to put this on the board, and it's this concept of shared view, because what we're still living in is this binary either or world. But what actually matters is when we put things together. So you've got your view and I've got mine, but what counts is ours. That's what matters. You know, Covey said there's always a third alternative. And I think we're locked into this, you know, either or binary world, rather than coming together and seeing there's always a third alternative. My wife and I, we were very fortunate to learn this concept, and I turned it into a business concept later on, but we learnt this as an early couple when someone said to us, don't disagree with your philosophies in front of your children. If you want to teach your children, have your disagreements in private and have a solidarity voice in front of your children. We found that good advice.
Yeah.
It's not
but, Ian, if it just jump back in there, I know Richard touched on it, but it comes right back to what Lindsay said at the very, very start. So Australia win 5-4 on penalties 4 or 5 hours ago, and they're heroes. But it could have quite easily have lost 4-5 and be zeros. And I think it's our society's desire to label things. Either you're a hero or you're a failure. And the reality is, it's just circumstantial which way you fall on that.
Yeah. And also,
and it's really, yeah, sorry.
Also, you were both.
That's exactly, but it's really important that we don't allow ourselves to buy the narrative of, it's human nature to label things like that. And when we're thinking of ourselves, when things are going well, you've got to, you know, it reminds me of the story, whether it's true or not, that whenever the Roman emperors were being escorted through Rome as the new emperor, they would have a slave on the chariot beside them saying the words into their ears, but remember, you are mortal. Remember, you will die. And I think it's really important that we bring down ourselves when things are going well. But when things aren't going well, don't beat ourselves up, because it's a narrative we're telling ourselves, and our own performance and our own standard is better than that.
Yes, even keel decisions, I think you said, Richard, which is a nice take. So, Lindsay, anything else before we sort of come in for a landing?
Well, funny you should say that. There is. I had one teacher who treated me special, and it's what I really needed, and I really loved him. He was very kind, caring, and treated me like, you know, I was just the bee's knees. And then I found out when I got older that he treated everyone. He treated I met other people that had been taught by him, and they described him to me, went, oh, maybe I wasn't that special after all. And then I got over that, and then I came to something deeper, that's just who he was. It was just amazing that that's the type of person that he was. And it was the greatest joy of my life when he called me to work on his staff years later. And so I became a teacher at one of his, he was working at a school where the students would come out. It was a demonstration school. So I became one of his teachers there, and it was the joy and privilege of my life to return the favour that he had given to me. And unfortunately, he died a few years ago, and I'd sort of lost touch with him. But his family were visiting in the area, and he had got cancer, and they contacted me and said, you know, we just wanted you to know that Dad is not travelling too well, which I thought was beautiful. And then when they came up here in the area, they made contact with me. And so his wife, his two daughters, and the son-in-law came round to my home. And I had the greatest joy just sharing what a beautiful husband, father, like to them. I just gave my tribute to the whole family, and it was very moving. So I really resonated with that, Ian, that you had someone in your life who cared for you.
Wonderful story, which leads us to sort of to conclude this episode 1, to kind of end with, because what I say is important, but nowhere near as important as what you hear yourself say to yourself. And you shared some of those wonderful things today, but then it's who we become and what we do next. And so I wonder what's maybe struck you as, well, who will you become? What will you actually do next as a consequence of our conversation today? And then, as I say, a new part of this season 2 is that you can, and you don't have to say anything about that today. You might let me know, but if you want help with implementing whatever it is, then just sing out and we'll schedule a short telephone call or a short Zoom call. But we've got a few minutes. If there was any sharing around, well, who will you become and what you do next, then we've got the time to do that if appropriate, or space for any other story sharing or comments you might have.
Sports Bedford is an interesting one. 20 miles down the road from me here, the second of 3 tests between England and New Zealand is being played.
Which is precariously placed, I think.
It is stunningly good. And the cricket is fabulous. But the thing that's better, even than that, is the spirit between the two teams. Because they are knocking 7 bells out of each other. And you know, it's the 5th day today, and we don't know how it's going to end. But the spirit of it, you know, there's been some phenomenal knocks, and the exchanges between the sides. They're staying in the same hotel. We know that they actually get on really well, but there is this huge competition. But at the same time, the camaraderie of it is just a joy to behold.
And I think it comes from, in part at least, it comes from the England coach is a little different to most, and because he has been, I was just going to try and find a quote. This was in Brendan McCullum, who's the New England coach's first press conference. I'm not too sure whether I can put my finger on it straight away. I don't think I can, but anyhow, I'll get it to you, because but one of the things that he, when in the first press conference, he referenced Ed Smith, who was a former England selector.
Yeah.
And he quoted Ed Smith, and the essence of it was we spent a lot of time thinking about mission statements and being the best in the world by 2057, and we have all these strategic plans, yada, yada. But if we just focused on being the best human beings we could be and behaving decently, everything works out.
Yeah,
I reckon that spirit is in the New Zealand team, and by the looks of it, also the English team.
Yeah, they come from Dan's lads coaches school, I think.
What is interesting though, that's another example, even in there, of the significance of someone in a position of authority or influence and the impact. That's been a theme today, hasn't it? In several of the stories, just how significant that is. Because you change the coach and you're changing the whole game, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
And there's several players, there's 2 coaches, but you change one of the coaches, and how all those people interact changes significantly. And that's very interesting. And
there's a point yesterday.
I wonder if people in those positions stop and think about the responsibility that comes with that.
When Ben Stokes came out yesterday, he was playing on with Root. And I mean, Root is just the most elegant batsman I think I've ever seen. Ben Stokes less so. He has the caveman approach to batting, really. Yeah. But as he actually came out in the middle there, he was saying to Root, he says, "You be you and I'll be me."
Yeah, that's right. What a wonderful thing.
Yeah, brilliant.
That is lovely, actually.
You know, you got I would say the classic kind of, ballet dancer versus a thug from the bush.
Yeah.
And I say that in a kind way to Ben Stokes, because he's played some glorious innings, including a couple in this series already. And I think should this be a draw, I think, or even an England win, I think we'll probably see something special from Stokes still to come. I think it was a glorious appointment to make him captain, but also a great risk.
Yeah.
I think it'll turn out well in the end. That's my gut feeling, because what you have here is a free spirit. Yeah. Who's been caged a bit. Yeah. So let him loose. And I think that McCullum's the kind of guy. And I think we're talking about lots of things here, but I would summarize it all by saying that just being good humans and behaving decently is at the bottom of it all.
Yep.
And Ian, just to chip in there, I think I remember saying to you back in August last year that an Australian had just been appointed manager of a team in the UK, Ange Postecoglou. Yes. And the early signs was he was something exceptional. Well, he won the league despite everyone saying he didn't have a chance. And he is a fascinating character in terms of leadership. He wears it lightly, but he's very authentic, and he's been able to connect with the fans and connect with the players. And he's definitely someone I'm watching at the moment as someone to learn from in terms of just how he is authentic to himself and wears responsibility lightly, but achieves things for the people around him. It's a fascinating guy.
Yep. I think there are lots of common threads between the best sports coaches at the moment and the worst, and that is that the best are focused on human beings and helping people to be that one of a kind that each of us is. Oh, and anything else before we go? I'm in gratitude to you for another wonderful conversation, but there might be some actions that you want to talk about, or some last words.
Well, my takeaway is definitely this idea of level thinking, not being too congratulatory when things are going well and not beating yourself up too much when they're not.
It's a great insight.
And Ian, I keep going back in my head. I keep seeing a book that I read mid-80s, probably 90s at latest, called The Inner Game of Tennis by Timothy Galwag. And
he actually coached Richard.
Is that right?
Yeah, I had a business with Tim for 3 years.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Well, when I read the sentence, the couple of sentences out of that book that truly changed my life, and I, without being brash, I've been an elite athlete in 3 disciplines, and Timothy's words made a massive change to me. And he said that success is about maximum participation, minimum attachment to the outcome.
Yeah. And
I thought, whoa, I'm going to work on that one. And I think I've been working on it for 30 years. But if you still, is he still alive?
Yeah, he is. Yeah, I mean, I think he's early 90s now.
Yeah, I thought I knew he'd be up there. If by chance you contact him, would you tell him you ran into a guy who said he's deeply indebted to him?
I will.
Yeah.
I will.
I think that's one of the great lessons, and that is to focus on your process and to be detached from the outcome.
Yeah.
I've had a struggle like you, Allan, with that for 30 plus years, but the older I get, the more I don't worry so much about the outcomes. I think we've got to be clear, Richard. I don't have goals anymore as such, but I've got a clear picture of where I'm going, and these days, and where I'm heading. And these days, I'm focused more on noticing things along the way than perhaps I've ever been. And just recently on this walk, and because I wasn't able to walk for a week or so, to just be back out there again, even though it's the same trail that we go on, but I'm noticing things every day that I've never seen before.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a daily lesson, that we need to be clear on where we're heading and why we're heading there. But then we need to enjoy the journey and notice stuff along the way. Yeah. There's a lot in that. And Richard, thank you for the insight there.
Yeah, I mean that's from his book again, but it's one of my favourites of Tim's.
Yeah.
Yeah, Richard, you shared that the other day, and
yeah,
I have a partner in my business, and we had an interesting conversation about my aspiration for the managers and her expectation of the managers, and the difference between those two things. And I passed her that quote, Richard, and she understood very clearly then the difference between her expectation she was bearing down upon the managers and my aspiration that one day they might come up to deliver these things.
Yeah.
That quote was very helpful.
It's a lovely one. I use it quite a lot.
Yes, wonderful. I think that's probably a perfect place to close down our conversation. My thanks to you all, and we'll gather again in September. But in the meantime, I will send that Ed Smith quote when I latch onto it. But in the meantime, reach out anytime if you'd like any help in implementing or integrating what we've talked about today. I wish you all the very best.
Thank you, sir.
And take care, everyone.
Thank you, gentlemen. Very appreciated.
Seeing you all.
Take great care. Bye for now.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye-bye.